7:30 התחלת? Alright, יופי. Good evening all. So, 3,000 years in 3 sessions. Are you strapped in and ready to go? Just a very quick review of what we talked about last week. I'm going to change the angle for those of you who are on the other side of the room, so you can at least see a little bit of. Can everyone see that? Sorry if you're just over here. So, we talked a little bit of the history, and we began with the shofar as being one of the instruments, one of the key instruments, especially we will come back to the whole idea of the Psalm 150 and all of the instruments within the Psalm. Hello. As you know, I start punctually and I try and finish punctually. So it's 7:30 on the dot. Actually, services tend to start about 30 seconds before, so the live stream can get live before we start. So I kick off the live stream at 5:59. So if you're ever curious about why it starts at 5:59, that's why. So we start on time and we finish on time. So the shofar. The shofar, probably one of the oldest instruments, simply because it is a horn of an animal and was accessible. And then we talked a little bit about the alphabet, and everyone read with me the first phrase of the Torah, which was Breishit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz, and we learned a little bit about cantillation. One of the oldest musical styles dating back, we know, from the 7th to the 9th century of the Common Era, but probably way, way before that. Because once they were documenting it because they were afraid that they would lose the tradition, so an oral law became documented. However, the oral law preceded the date of documentation by we don't know how long, right? Certainly centuries. And we speculate dating back to Ezra declaiming from the steps. By the way, those were the southern steps. So for those of you who've been to Jerusalem, how many of you have been to the southern steps, not the western wall, right? So the southern steps is where there are these large, long steps which actually have different heights. Do you know why the different heights? You can't run up steps when they're uneven. And you shouldn't be running to the temple. So the steps were intentionally uneven. You can't run, right? Because it's step, 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 step. you can't run. So there's a reason why they're set up. And the southern area, if you look at some of the archaeological digs, that's where the pens for the sacrificial animals were kept before they were brought up to the temple. So that's where they were also inspected. That's where they were prepared before they would be brought up. In any case, I don't want to get off track because that's a whole subject for another scholar series. So, Breishit bara Elohim, and many of you had your bar mitzvah last Thursday night. When I threw lollies at you, I found out only afterwards that they were extremely sour. So I didn't realize until I saw many of you puckering and going, because they were extremely sour lollies. They were sweet, but they were also extremely sour. So this was the Jerusalem Bible Koran edition with the script, with the cantillation and the vowels. And that is a copy from Jeremiah with the corrections and the vowels in the margin. So we talked about the trope and we talked about the Dead Sea Scrolls just a little bit. I would very much like to have a course on the Apocrypha and the Pseudepigrapha. Thank you. All the external books that didn't make it into the canon, and to have a conversation about those because they are fascinating and they are of this era. And yet they didn't make it into the canon, but they would radically change our theology had they made it into the canon. So it would be really fascinating. And a lot of them are available online in the museum that they have actually uploaded it with translations. So you can actually click and word by word, it shows you the text as it is in the scrolls that we have found, the text as it would be were it written in modern Hebrew text, and the translation in whatever language you happen to click on, which makes for really fascinating reading. Not Israeli Museum. You can look up, for example, the Dead Sea Scrolls. There's a number of them. And if you actually go there, the scrolls are actually preserved, but in a circular, you can walk around them and see an actual scroll. I got the chance to study with one of the scholars who got to unroll some of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And it's really funny because he talks about how, they weren't allowed to put any moisture or anything that would damage the scrolls. So what they would do is they'd put the scroll in the tent. They'd put a little pot on an open fire, and the pot would cause humidity into the air, and they would go for a little walk, and they'd come back because they couldn't open the scrolls without the scroll crumbling. And so they weren't supposed to use humidity, but they did, which of course has caused further deterioration. But at the time, the technology that they had didn't allow them to unroll the scrolls. So what they've done since then, now they can actually X-ray through the scroll and not unroll it at all, which is amazing, right? So they can now, if or when they find a new scroll, they don't have to fear damaging the scroll. But most of the scrolls from that era were catastrophically deteriorated and weren't accessible. In any case, subject for another course, the Dead Sea Scrolls, identical to what we have of Deuteronomy and Isaiah. So Deutero-Isaiah and parts of the other scrolls from the 5 books of the Torah, dating back 2,500, 3,000 plus years. And of course, if we have a scroll from that era, it reflects that those scrolls reflect a tradition that was many hundreds of years prior to that as well. We don't really know quite how far back. So, the text that we do have, so a codex was a bound volume which was stitched together, made on animal hide, very much like our Torah today. But at the time, they could not print. They didn't have printers. So, anyone know when printing started? 1492. Same year. Yes. Yes. China did have some versions that actually predated, but what we understand is the modern printing started in 1492, same year as the expulsion of the Jews from Spain. Yeah. So, however, so 1492, look at the dates on these. These all precede printing significantly, so they were all written on parchment, on animal hide, and they were bound in what was called a codex. A codex is the equivalent of what we would today call a book or a tome, because they were much thicker than paper today. And so even though today you can get a Torah in a relatively small volume, at the time it was a tome, and it was sheaf after sheaf of animal hide on which this was handwritten. Some of them were beautifully ornamented, which is really quite interesting. In any case, we have 895 Common Era, 930 Common Era, 1009 Common Era, and 925 Common Era approximately. And we have Leningrad, Aleppo, British Museum. So we talked about the accents and the functions of the accents and punctuation. Stop, teachers only, no children allowed, versus stop, teachers only, no children allowed. Or woman without her man is nothing, or woman without her man is nothing, or woman without her man is nothing, right? So all in the punctuation, which was all coming directly from cantillation. Cantillation equals comprehension. We dislike foolish people. Like you, we find them foolish. Or, we dislike foolish people like you. Oh dear. We find them very foolish, right? So, or let's eat grandma. Right? That's always a popular one. Like, I'm not coming anywhere near you until I hear a comma. Right? So then we learned a little bit of cantillation, so I'm going to skip through it. So, what is the music of the Bible? So we don't actually know. Let's start there. To be clear, Everything we say from here on is speculative. Now, speculative is still based on the information that was shared with us by the Bible itself, for example, right? Or by other texts which were of that era, or by instruments which have been preserved to whatever degree. Most instruments weren't preserved because they were made out of wood. Wood doesn't last 3,000 years, right? With very, very few exceptions. So the result of that is all we have is things that might have been engraved in stone, which depicted the instrument in question. And so that gives us some inkling of the kinds of instruments. Also, the descriptions of the sounds that were made gives us some kind of inkling of what kind of instruments were being played and how they sounded at the time. So here you have what looks like it might be more Christian than Jewish, but that's not necessarily the case, because you have to remember that this is what Jews looked like at the time, especially at a time when there was no electrical lighting. But you can see you've got trumpets, so brass instruments of some kind, and you've got a portable harp, and you've got the poor little apprentice carrying the tome on his back, right? Yes, yes. Which to me feels like it's more a Greek kind of an image than a Jewish image, because I don't know that the Jews were big on worshipping the body in the way that the Greeks did. In any case, you have. Oh, I left my book on my desk. No, it's okay. We've got the musical traditions, but they were destroyed by and large by the destruction of the temple. So, along with the destruction of the first temple, and then even more so, the destruction of the second temple and the exile which came with it. That broke a chain of musical and literary tradition that had gone back, we don't know how many, certainly many hundreds of years, if not thousands of years. Oh, look, Ido is such a tzaddik. אתה צדיק גמור. אמן. תודה רבה לך. So we have a broken tradition. The tradition was broken with the destruction of the temple and the exile. As soon as we have the exile, we have also the dispersion of the Jews. So we have little enclaves who end up in different places and who preserve music in different ways. Now, Judaism has always, since the dispersion, adopted the characteristics of the music of the land in which we live. So my father's musical tradition and his auditory preferences were Arabic music. He was born in Algeria. That's where he was born. And he grew up with his lovely neighbor who was Muslim. And they were good friends, and they lived together, and they had amazing relationships, and you know, all was more or less honky-dory until 1948. And then even more so until 53, after which most of the Jews in Algeria left in the mid-50s, and certainly anyone who was left behind got out before 67, because in 67 anyone who didn't get out was dead. So my father described leaving Algeria when they started throwing hand grenades into the local Jewish cafeteria. So just so you know, the stories of modernity are no different to the stories of the 1950s. We're not at the point of hand grenades, but unfortunately the realities of persecution are historically repetitive. So the music of Jews who were living in the Arab North Africa, or in Spain, or in Eastern Europe, were directly influenced by the musical traditions of those regions. So, what kind of music and what kind of instruments? So, although David is known for his playing of the lyre and harp, these are some of the other instruments that we know of from this era and that we have remnants of. So we have different kinds of animal horns, shofarot. The different shapes reflect different animals, right? So different animals have different shaped horns, right? And you end up with a slightly different sound and a different shape in an animal horn. You have various percussion instruments, right? Various percussion instruments. You have shakers in which you would put something like beans, dried beans or rice. Still today, you know, you get a little egg shaker or, you know, they put rice and things in them so that you get this shaking sound. You have various kinds of drums. You have various recorders, like the pan flute, right? So various kinds of recorders, some with holes, some without holes, where it was the different length of the tube of wood that would allow for a different sound. Different string instruments, lyres of different kinds. And then what we don't get to here is the early forms of the oud or guitar, which we have an example. It's really ironic because Ido hasn't got a traditional oud. He has a modern oud, which looks more like a guitar, a somewhat misshapen guitar, but it nonetheless recognizable as in the guitar genre. So ancient instruments include all sorts of things in this genre and cymbals, which we know from Psalm 150. So here you have, again, the coins with the harp and the trumpets and the different instruments that we had on Psalm 150, which we read every week. You don't need to copy it here. Okay, so we sing, right? Hallelujah, beteka shofar, hallelujah, benevel bechinor, hallelujah, betof umachol, hallelujah, beminim ve'ugav, kol hancha mate, hallelujah, 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 kol hancha mate, hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. So different versions, because you've also got the Lewandowski. Hallelujah, hallelujah, same words. You love that? You grew up with that, right? Whereas the other version is known as a Yemenite composition. That version is, you know, great Lewandowski Germanic tradition. So, string instruments, whether they are different kinds of lyres, the bull lyre, very much deeper, longer strings, the hand lyre, which would be, or harp, the hand one which was resting against the body, and the larger one, and then you have different kinds of lutes or ouds. Now, Ido has one here. Ido, why don't you come up and play a little for us just so that we can hear. Now, oud is an absolute master of this instrument, so much so that we had to brush the dust off the top of it because it's been a while since he's used it. Yes. So same word. So this is a modernized version. So the back is flattened, and it's designed to be plugged into an electrical amplifier because they didn't have electrical strings. So what kind of strings do you have?
Nylon strings.
Nylon.
So it's the same as a classical guitar.
Right. So he's got nylon strings, whereas they used to use animal gum, which didn't last and didn't have the strength to maintain the tension. And the result was that they didn't necessarily have these frets here, which create semitones, but rather when they didn't have them, does yours have them? No, good, no, excellent. No, yeah. They shouldn't have them because it comes from a North African tradition which often had quarter tones. So the quarter tones, which for us sound like, oh dear, it's out of tune. It's not out of tune. They're quarter tones, and their ears are tuned so much better than ours. And when I was working with the Fay Dumont Singers, which is the choir that now David Cram conducts all these years later, one of the exercises that we had was to sharpen our semitones. We worked on our quarter tones. And to do that, we got everyone to actually slide up and down the semitones in order to hear the sharpening or flattening of the note. Now, that sounds a little technical. So let me help you understand what that sounds like. In order to do this, you have to sing. So, you have to sing one note. Everyone sing, ah. Good, stop, thank you. You're going to sing that note, ah. Now, you're going to sing, ah, which is a little bit higher, right? So, can you sing, ah, ah. Good. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to slide down to them. Ah. So you go, ah. Now going down, ah. So on the way down, you go past the quarter note, right? So in order to go past the quarter note, now when I have 3 groups, I get 2 groups to hold on to the ah, which is a clash, and then the other person goes up and down, and then that sharpens the semitones. We've done this in Kol Simchas sometimes, right? Because that helps us. So the oud is an instrument which allows you to have quarter tones. So let's hear a little bit of Ido playing on his oud that I don't know when the last time you literally dusted it off.
It's been a while. Move this a little bit closer so you can hear it.
Very nice. Thank you, Ido.
Yeah, thank you.
So, not a traditional oud, a adapted oud, which is more similar. You can dust yourself off now a little bit too. That wasn't bad considering he hasn't played on it for so long. So yes, it's a gentle sound because it's an acoustic sound. So modern days we have overwhelming sounds, like we have where there's a barrage of sounds, and we often lose the gentleness of an acoustic instrument, which can be quiet and beautiful and subtle, and the sounds can also slide up between the tones and be very, very expressive. Whereas nowadays we tend to be in concerts where the sound is overwhelming and subtleties at times lost upon us, which is a little bit tragic considering where sound came from, which was subtlety and beauty and emotion. And don't get me wrong, I love a big orchestra, right? There's nothing like hearing the 1812 overture or Beethoven's Ninth, or like these massive orchestras. But at the same time, this is a whole different genre. Okay, so we have a little bit, I'd like to play a little bit of what is speculated as perhaps being authentic music of this era. So there is some music done by Michael Levi. So this is harps or lyres. Test. Nope. This is trying to reenact music from biblical era. Can you hear the similarity to the oud that we heard a moment ago? This is a lap harp, a lap harp. No, it's a lap harp. I can even show you, if you want, I can show you some images. Hold the thought. Ooh, your image is gone. Hold the thought. I'll get you an image. You've got sound, but no image. There you go. Ooh. Internet is a wonderful thing. Yeah. So for anyone who can't read it, played by the Levites in the temple. Fits a 10-string, perhaps something similar to the biblical lyre itself. Pretty cool, right? So probably reconstructed from images which were on the coins. Remember the coin I showed you a moment ago? This is it. Or an example of it. No, it's more like a pick, just like plecton. Yeah. So we use plastic or wood to pluck the keys. Yeah, I think what he's doing is trying to have to amplify the sound, or you wouldn't hear the sound. So this is, Michael Levi is an academic musician trying to recreate sounds in instruments that he's recreating. He's just manufacturing them based off the photos that, if you go back to here, so if you look at all goes by in a bit of a flash. There it is. Right? So we have metallic coins from this era, from literally 2,500 years ago. And these kinds of coins give us an image of instruments which were clearly current in the day. And so we have someone like Michael Levi trying to recreate an instrument to emulate the sound. Pretty cool, right? How accurate is it? Who knows? But we do know, for example, that when they talk about the trumpets, they have a thin, sharp, strident sound. So the fact that they could make a metallic trumpet at all is a remarkable statement. So, but you can see even here, you can see the trumpets. And then here, once we get past all the different instruments, here you've got the Arch of Titus, and you have the trumpets. You also have the menorah that they stole, right? Now, we actually have no idea what happened to that because it was made of solid gold, right? So we don't know if they melted it down or if it was somewhere deep in the archives of the Vatican. No one's admitting anything, right? So maybe not. But we know, for example, we found long lost tractates of the Talmud in the Vatican archives, right? Which was amazing, right? Really cool that something which dates that back 2,000 years and had been lost to us had been preserved in the archives in the Vatican. And goodness knows what else they've got there. But anyway, I would assume something like that, which was made of solid gold, probably was melted down or appropriated elsewhere. The destruction of the Second Temple?
No, the Vatican. How did the Vatican?
Right, so it was stolen by Rome, right? It was Rome, right? They destroyed the temple and they carried back the loot, the plunder. And so on the Arch of Titus, you have elements of the plunder being brought back to Rome, right? And amongst other things, so relevant to us is not so much the menorah, which is just a sore point, but rather the instruments that are on the Arch of Titus. So along with coins, what other evidence do we have? We have things which might be engraved in stone, literally. And from there, we have some idea of the instruments that were being played at the time because they literally engraved them as part of the loot that they brought back from the temple in the year 70. Right? So that's how we know some of the instruments of that era. Now, I'm not saying all, and we still don't know what they sound like, but we have some indication of some of the instruments. So wind instruments, cornet, dulcimer, flute, horn, some kind of organ, a pipe, a trumpet, silver trumpets, double oboe, that they were some of the trumpets on the Arch of Titus and in Rome and the coins. The trumpets were very high-pitched with thin body and shrill sounds. Okay? So we can only speculate. No. No. Only much later. So yes, there are things, but it's only from much, much later. So once we have many people who've written theses about the comparison between Gregorian chant and Jewish modes and chanting, or even other chanting from other traditions. So we do have some information, but it's much, 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 much later, right? Because anything that was transcribed was pretty much destroyed, with very few exceptions, when it was transcribed on tablets or stone.
So to sustain the formal part,
Mm-hmm.
could they reverse engineer and go back and be speculating on where the strings were
Mm-hmm.
for what the music may have actually
Yeah, that's what Michael Levi's doing. Right, he's doing exactly that. He's reverse engineering from the images and the descriptions. So we have images from coins and stone etchings, and we have descriptions of people saying Hallelujah, Betzilzelei Shama, Betzilzelei Torah. So we know all these instruments existed, but what they sounded like, sometimes we have descriptions, contemporary descriptions of how X instrument was shrill or was calming as a lullaby, whatever it might have been. But those descriptions help us reverse engineer. So, but it's speculative, right? So that's why I'm always hesitant to make any outright claim that we have actual knowledge rather than reverse engineered speculation. So percussion instruments were bells, cymbals, sistrum, tabret, hand drums, tambourines, the tabre or the timbrel, a small hand drum used for festival occasions and considered a woman's instrument. When the children of Israel came out of Egypt and crossed the Red Sea, and here we're citing, Miriam took a timbrel in her hands, and all the women went out after her with the timbrels to dance. That's Exodus 15. And here is an image of the women dancing, and here's another more modern image of dance, because dance was directly associated with music and was an important part of various events. What it actually looked like, we don't know. The actual dance movements are not described anywhere in any detail, other than to say that women danced. So, the orthodox tendency to claim that that women should not be heard singing or that women should not be seen dancing is in direct conflict with biblical descriptions, right? So, because Miriam did, right? And setting that aside, just control yourself, boys, right? Right. Okay, so women were dancing in the biblical times. It's in the biblical narrative. So at least 2,500 years plus back, women were dancing in front of all the men in the biblical era. The Bible, the Mishnah, the Talmud, dance is referred to in various contexts in Megiddo, the Negev, and other sites in Israel. Recently found iconography remnants show dancing figures. Judges 21:21, a festival is described during which it was customary to dance in the vineyards. What does that sound like? Sorry? They were drunk. Thanks, Julian. Harvest festival, exactly. It was a harvest festival.
What about Vashti? After it comes down and done.
Yes. Yes, for the king's cohort. Yes. It's interesting, you've also chosen to play Vashti quite often, mainly because Vashti said no. Yes, yes. Which sounds a lot like pagan rituals that were integrated into Judaism and reappropriated in a different way. And then with the destruction of the temple, post-Talmudic era, rabbinic Judaism banned women's voices and women's dancing, right? Why is a different issue for a different era, but just saying at this time in history, women were dancing and singing in the public context. Dancing was associated with celebrations of military victims, welcoming home heroes. Exodus 15:20, Miriam and the other women burst into song and dance, accompanied by drums to mark the parting of the Red Sea. This is the story, the Exodus story. They get to the other side, and what do? They sing and they dance. And Miriam dances with her timbrel. Jephthah's daughter danced to meet her father returning from the victorious battles. That's Judges 11:34. The women of Israel came out to dance before Saul and David upon their return from fighting the Philistines in 1 Samuel 18:6. The king and his subjects were also inspired to dance when the Ark of the Covenant was brought up to Jerusalem. 2 Samuel chapter 6. Just to cite a few, right? Dancing was normative practice, and we've just been so influenced by the Protestant tradition that we have lost the spontaneity, the joy of getting up and dancing. So a person should not have an ear just to hear the songs of others, but also to hear the songs which sing from within his or her heart. Right? So that's Rabbi Yisrael of Modzitz. So music has always been a part of spiritual connections. And the form it came in changed over time. So much of the most beautiful music of the Bible is contained in the Psalms. And the word psalm itself comes from the Greek word meaning to sing and strike the lyre. To sing or to strike the lyre. The sartor or psaltery was one of the instruments which accompanied the Psalms, and the Psalms were sung antiphonally. Antiphonally meaning call and response, just like Ashrei yoshvei beitecha od ya'alelucha selah. There you go, right? Responsive. That was beautiful, by the way. Perhaps coming from the priest or the congregation or by two choruses. That's what I described last week when I talked about the Yemenite and the Syrian tradition sitting in opposite corners. It's also why the Sephardi shul tends to be set up in a box, right? Or at least in a U-shaped, maybe with an opening facing the ark, but sometimes they even have seats there, so people would sit and face inwards, and that allows them to sing, with this peitan tradition of one-upping each other. According to Shiloach, most of the customs and ceremonies, such as weddings or other celebrations, were accompanied by music made by women and attests to the importance of women's song. Ancient music historian Joachim Brown notes that Philo had mentioned ritualistic vigils near Alexandria that included a meal and the singing of hymns by a double chorus as accompaniment to the procession and the libations. Right? So we have clear documentation of women specifically, generally music in general, but women specifically. Every locksmith has a master key with which he can open many doors. Negina, which is music, is such a key, for it can unlock all doors. Because music bypasses the intellect and accesses the emotion without necessarily transiting through the intellect. And most of the time, if you get distracted by the intellect, by any thought of look at their technique or something like that, they have lost you, right? You have to be swept away in order for it to succeed. On the right-hand side, you have one of the mystical depictions of the Sephirot. And music was often associated with Jewish mysticism. Jewish mysticism is another course which we'll give at some point, but when we're trying to get through 3,000 years in 3 days, we'll have to keep moving. So, with the diaspora, with the expulsion of the Jews end up in different parts of the world. When they end up in different parts of the world, they end up influenced by the music of whatever part of the world they happen to be in. We tend not to hear a lot about the Sephardi music because in Australia, we are predominantly Ashkenazi Holocaust survivors in Melbourne. With the exception of a small cohort in the Sephardi Shul, where they come from mainly North Africa, not so much from Spain. So the Spanish tradition hasn't really made it to Australia. However, the Spanish or Ladino tradition has a lot of music from what is effectively so it is Spanish so Yiddish is 70% German, 25% Hebrew, 5% whatever language was normative in the area. So Polish, Russian, Yugoslavian, Romanian, whatever else it was. So, in the Yiddish that was spoken in my household, the floor is a podlogo, right? Podloga in Polish is a floor, right? So we say a podlogo, right? There are other words in Yiddish which are directly from Hebrew, which is not uncommon, 25% Hebrew. Judeo-Spanish was called Ladino. And Ladino is basically 70% Spanish, 25% Hebrew, and 5% whatever else it might have been. And you have Spanish romances, which sound a little like this. So it's got the Sephardi plus a little bit of a mix of the North African, right? I'll give you a cleaner version of Judeo moment. I just need to find it. Here we go. The oldest of modern art.
Los bíblicos cantan suspiros de amor. Los bíblicos cantan con suspiros de amor. Mi neshama, mi ventura está en tu poder. Mi neshama.
Less distortions from modern instrumentation and rhythms. You can hear what was the equivalent of a lute, perhaps a modern guitar, but a lute. You'll see in this slide. Here are the words.
Los bíblicos cantan en el árbol de la flor de cuello se asentan los que sufren del amor de cuello se asentan los que sufren del amor. Mucha chica, mucha chica.
Slightly different words, yeah. So there are different, because it's an oral tradition and it's a love song, a lullaby in this case. You have different renditions, and some of them have more Hebrew, some of them have more Spanish. Yeah, that's right. She was already in the second verse, or had she had the first line and then some of the second verse in this version. But it's one of the better known of the Ladino canzones, which is a romance, a folk song. So Sephardi music includes pan-Sephardic music, which may not necessarily be Judeo-Spanish. Primarily vocal instruments, when they are used, are played to accompany songs. Instrumental practices amongst Sephardim is generally reflected that of the host culture. So Greek, Turkish. When you get into North African, you've got Moroccan, Algerian, etc. Instruments are most commonly plucked lutes, so without frets. As soon as you're without frets, that means you have quarter tones that come in. The Middle Eastern lute and the Turkish fretted saz, or sometimes mandolin, or the khumbash or kanun or santur, plucked or hammered Middle Eastern zither, a violin and hand drums. Note again the violin without frets, so you have quarter tones that can come into it. Framed and goblet drums. For weddings and other occasions, other celebrations, musicians might also be hired from the Muslim community. So interestingly enough, my family in the south of France, when they have a wedding, they bring in the band, and the band is made up half of Jews and half of Muslims. And when they play at a Jewish event, they will do some of the Hebrew music, right? Including Havana Gila, etc., whatever it might be. And when they play at a Muslim event, they will play the Muslim music. So the influences are quite different. The musicians are not, right? And because the aesthetic is quite shared, they will cross over. And actually, there's a restaurant in the south of France, just near Nice, which is where my family goes, where they actually took a photo and sent it to me because it had an Israeli flag draped next to a Palestinian flag. And it's a restaurant where people come and eat, Jews, Muslims, and it's still going today. despite all the complexities of, yeah. So there's a very sincere sharing. Tubul, Tubul. Yes. Yes, it's pronounced Tubol in English, so Tubul in, yeah. Yeah, and not necessarily from a musical instrument, but not an uncommon Sephardi name. So the Sephardim escaped to France, many of them. So they came from French-speaking colonies in North Africa. So they tended to go to French-speaking countries, mainly France, a little bit to Canada, Belgium, etc. So the culture in Europe, in France specifically, is predominantly Sephardi. So when you want something exotic, you eat something Ashkenazi, or you listen to music which is Ashkenazi, because that to them is exotic, because the common normative practice there is a Sephardi practice. Well, so there you go. So, my family, for example, the typical Friday night, they weren't eating chicken soup and gefilte fish, they were eating couscous. That's what they eat every Friday night, right? So it's a very different tradition, it's a very different culture, and it's a culture that's influenced by the countries around which they... Wow. Wow. How cool is that? It's fascinating. Look, it was not uncommon for women to play instruments or to sing. That is a modern... It was banned in modernity by the Orthodox. You can attribute whatever reason you want to it, but it's just a reality. So in modernity, that was very much a more recent reality. But in this era, it was very common for women to sing and dance and play, and that has not changed throughout hundreds and thousands of years. Okay, I'm going to set aside what is a relatively recent aberration in Orthodox Jewish practice, excluding women. Right? I might even add that in Talmudic times, in Tractate Megillah, page 23a, there is a place where a woman chanted Torah. Right? So if it's in the Talmud, right, how can anyone say you can't do it today? So their justification was that were someone to be tamemet is associated with anything which is life and death. Blood is life and death. Therefore, if you crush an ant, you have come in contact with life and death, and you are ritually impure for the purpose of ritual sacrifices in the temple. If you have a paper cut and you have any blood, you are ritually impure for temple sacrificial rites. If you menstruate, same thing. Right? So, now, whether the question is misogyny or power, control, right? What the reason behind it is actually secondary, and we can only speculate. But the reality is, over time, whether it's fear of the unknown, that which they didn't understand, many of these texts are actually all about protecting the woman. I'll give you an example. After giving birth, the woman is sent to a house in which she's looked after by other women. What's the purpose of this? Some people say, well, that's misogyny, where she's exiled and whatever. No, what you're trying to do is protect her from the man, expecting her to have intercourse with him, right? And she's not exactly wanting intercourse because she's just given birth, right? Pushed out a watermelon, or a baby, as the case may be. And the last thing that she wants in that moment is to actually have intercourse. And so she's protected by being housed and looked after by a group of women, right? Yeah, yeah, same thing. Same thing. So it's interesting how many texts look misogynistic to our modern eyes or ears. The ketubah is another example. So the historical ketubah talks about the woman being, if she's a virgin, she's worth a couple of camels and a goat and a couple of ducks and a chicken. If she's not a virgin, just a couple of chickens and a duck or two, and that's about it. And everyone thinks, oh, it's such a hateful document. It was designed to protect the woman, to say she has rights and you may not leave her without returning these allocated and documented sums to her, right? So while it looks to us like it's a misogynistic text, in reality it was designed to protect the woman. Now, in modernity, we may choose to modernize that text into something that feels a little more apropos to us, which is, of course, the Orthodox don't do, but we do. So there are many examples of that. The point is that women danced, women sang, women played instruments at the time, and it's documented. So, even today, there is also a blend of Jewish and Muslim musicians commonly playing together in bands which would perform this kind of Judeo-Arabic music even today. Very commonly, the canzones, so the Sephardi, the Ladino music would be played also or sung by women rather than by men. Not that men were excluded, because I don't think that's the case, but most commonly sung by women. Generally, Sephardi men played both local percussion and melody instruments, while women usually sang unaccompanied in domestic context. At weddings, accompanied their singing with tambourines and sometimes other percussion instruments. Molho, who's an academic, described Salonika Sephardic women using kitchen utensils as improvised percussion in a manner reminiscent of Spanish and Portuguese village practices today. You think of spoons and pots and all sorts of instruments. Anything that came to hand became an instrument. I'll give you another example. I haven't cued this one. Im Min Alu by Ofra Chaza here. Famous Israeli singer, Ofra Chaza. So, Ofra Chaza is fascinating. So she dresses up in a traditional Yemenite garb. She's a spectacular-looking woman. And on the front of one of her CDs is this amazing woman who happened to both do traditional music, but she also became renowned in America in the heavy metal genre, which is fascinating to me because I was looking for her music because I was fascinated by her music. So I bought a whole bunch of her CDs, not having listened to them at all, and ended up with a bunch of heavy metal CDs, thinking, what the hell am I listening to? So, because she became famous in the heavy metal, so she came from the traditional Sephardi genre and transitioned into an American heavy metal world. Yes, Yes, and that metallic sound is, so if you think back to anyone who's under about 30 or even 40 might not remember the metal garbage bins, which were before the big green bins, and these metal bins were about yay high, and the garbos would literally pick them up and dump into the garbage truck before they had these arms which would automatically pick up these big plastic bins. So those metal bins with the metal lids, which were used as like cymbals, right? So anything that you could lay your hands on became an instrument. And the more interesting the sound, the more you would hear it. So here you can hear it in between her singing. Every time she sings, listen in between. You hear that metallic hollow sound? That's the garbage bin.
That's just in relation. I remember hearing a program a while ago that the sound effects in films and TV programs are used common every day.
Yes.
It's very interesting. They talk about the goons, how they make
Yes?
sound.
Yes, yes. I've even seen,
Imagine where the sound comes from.
there was a machine that a single person used to use to make all the sound effects on all of the Disney cartoons. And it was this phenomenal machine where he would, blow on something or shake something or bash something or, and he had all these different sounds. And it was a solo event until they, only in recent years, have digitalized all the sounds. And now they can make any sound using a synthesizer. But even then, yeah. Hey, so Spanish, Portuguese.
What's her name again, sorry?
Ofrajaza. In Eastern Mediterranean, women musicians specialized in singing and drumming for weddings known as tañederes, and they played a central role in the wedding event. Some early 20th century Ottoman-era Jewish schools taught udand and mandolin to girls, and some women learned to play the piano. In any case, whether or not instruments are used, the main and always appropriate instrument in Sephardic music is the voice. Always has been. Medieval instruments as such are not used except in cases such as the oud, where the instrument has survived with minimal changes in traditional practices, even though this has had significant changes because this is a modern version of an oud rather than a traditional version which looks more like a lyre. So, I wanted to play a little bit more of some of these Sephardi influenced music. So here we go. No, you'll get that later. Lyres, harps, ouds, plucked instruments. Very simple, right? Nowadays the instrumentation is much more textured, much more dense, difficult to make out. Whereas here you have a very simple. Okay. So last week I talked a little bit about Salomone Rossi. Let me see if I can find it for you. Because I've had to transition across to different technologies, and What does that sound like to you? Sounds like bagpipe, doesn't it? Right? So basically they used to take the bladder of an animal and they used to press on it in order to get the air to come through, and they had a reed. So they would have a pipe into which they were blowing, which was filling the bladder with air. This is the creation of the bagpipe. So they would fill the bladder with air, and as they squeezed, they would play on the other pipe, which would be pushing the air through the reed and giving you this quite nasal sound. Can you hear how the music meanders? And it's always got this ba, which even when Ido was playing the oud, did you hear how he kept on coming back to the, and then he would play the melody up here, but he would come back to this bow. Yes. Yeah, quite often. So here you have it as well. So you can hear that. And the call and the response of the choir. And there's almost a dance to it. Bum ba da ba da da da, bum ba da ba 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 ba. Right, so you've got this dance kind of rhythms that come into it, and you've got a call and response, and the paitan, the equivalent of the Ashkenazi chazan, would proclaim how awesome God is, and the choir would support in the background. This is pre-Baroque, so 15th, 16th centuries circa. That's about where we're up to now. So we're still very early, but you're already starting to get into something that's recognizable in its melodic structure, in chordal structures, and in the choral music. So for some reason I can't find it, so I'll find it again. Rossi. Now, some of you may be familiar with this. Sorry? Yes. Yes. So it's Baroque music. Okay? So it's Baroque music by Salomon Rossi, who wrote a complete service. Some of us here have performed some of his music, including some of our choir. That was his Adon Olam. Really quite beautiful. But, yeah, the Baruch Hu. So, but it's very choral, Baroque period choral kind of music. Now, remember, when we say things like that, we're assuming that they had it first, right? Now, I'm not one of these people who says, oh, they got everything from us. I don't believe that, because it was cross-influencing, right? So does it sound Christian, or does their music sound Jewish, right? Or does it sound Muslim, or does the band sound like a bunch, half of Jews and half of Muslims, because that's what was normal, right? So I'm always hesitant about using it sounds Christian. It's like people who talk about the organ in the synagogue. Oh, that sounds like a church. No, there was an organ in the temple 2,000 years ago before Christianity existed, right? So the people who keep on saying it sounds Christian is because you have an impression and perception in your mind of what Christian sound like, and you find that alienating. And so as soon as you hear the organ, you associate to Christianity. But if you were more steeped in Jewish music, you would realize that this is actually Jewish music, including the organ. Right? So, right, because it's in mourning. Right. So, we don't know. It was a water organ. So we don't actually know, but we believe it was powered by some kind of water process. That was what was filling the air, and that would allow them to play an instrument. But we don't actually know if it was an organ, anything like we can imagine today, rather than another instrument. We just don't have enough information. But what we do know is that instruments were used in the temple, right? So the Orthodox claim is, well, with the destruction of the temple, we are in mourning, and just like if you're grieving for a parent, a sibling, or spouse, or a child, you don't listen to any instrumental music. So therefore, on Shabbat, we don't listen to music or instruments, but we do have singers, and the singers do amazing things, just like the Levitical chorus in the temple used to do amazing things. But the reason is that if you drop the guitar, the oud, or whatever it is, you might repair it, and that would be breaching the Sabbath. And if you were to breach the Sabbath, well, we have to kill you, stone you. So therefore, don't play the instrument.
What does that have to do with creation? That you're creating something new?
No. So it's to do with either, there are multiple arguments because they conflate them. One argument is that we're in mourning, and so we don't listen to instruments. But the other argument is the repairing the item would be an act of creation. Not that music is creation, right? Yes, anything. And there are some instruments that you can't fix. Why not play that instrument? It's not consistent, is it? Right? Anyway, so you can break pretty much any instrument, with the exception of like a shofar. Anything else can be broken, like whether it's a piano key or string, or a guitar string, or a harp string, or the valves on pretty much any instrument. Yeah. Correct. Yes. Look, it is what it is. And my purpose here isn't to deconstruct the Orthodox theology. Ultimately, this is the reality that the Orthodox function with, and it's also part of the reason why we as a movement exist, right? As a statement of, we believe in the evolving theological choices that we make, and one of those is that women can be playing and singing, and that so can instruments, right? And this goes back hundreds of years. Okay, so Piyutim have been written since Mishnaic times. So Piyutim, okay. Yeah, I'm not sure that I can find, my Spotify doesn't like Piyutim. And I had it all on, here we go. I had it all on iTunes when I first created some of this collection. But of course, iTunes doesn't work. So this is the Shachrit service for Shabbat as sung by the Moroccan tradition. So what he's doing there is giving you an idea of the shape and the sounds. Let me see if I can get. I'm not sure because it sounded like an electronic keyboard. But that's something along this line, and you can hear double tops on it. You can also hear a Spanish chord.
השמיים מספרים כבודו וגם הארץ מלאה חסדו
A violin, quarter tone.
השמיים מספרים כבודו
The heavens are
וגם
honor.
הארץ מלאה חסדו
Even the land is filled with his glory.
ראו
And he's just warming up by the way. By the way, lots of belly dancing in this tradition too, as well. See?
כי הוא עצור תמים פעולו عيروح مهللني فيه القادر دينورا ليثبت هكا دشري فيها عقوبة بحصيرة عيروح
Now, I can see most of you are enjoying that, right? So, when my father used to put on the music of his childhood, my mother would run screaming out of the house, right? She couldn't stand it because it had all these quarter tones. And she was like still in this European, Polish, Yiddish like music. So, she couldn't stand it. Whereas my father, he didn't want to listen to Yiddish. He's like, what is this? And she says, this is Jewish music. He's like, what are you talking about? Right? Jewish music. That's not Jewish music. This is Jewish music. Right? So Jewish music depends on where you came from. Interesting. Right. So it's what do you connect with? Right? That's what's soulful. It's what do you connect with? What is I spoke with my cousin in France 2 days ago, and was she born? I think she was born in Algeria. I'm not quite sure. She's a number of years older than I am. And anyway, she's working on a series of songs which is blending Ladino and Yiddish. And so she's reaching out to me to hear the pronunciation of some of the Yiddish and some of the Hebrew and whatever it might be. And you know, she's as secular a Jew as you can get, right? Like, yes, her mother was like my aunt, my father's sister, so very traditional, but she's doesn't have any link other than a cultural link. So her exploration of Jewish music is her Jewish identity. And what is spiritually moving to her has got nothing to do with God, but is about music. And she happens to be working on a composition that blends Ladino and Yiddish, right? Which is fascinating. She's both a composer and a musician, and her husband is as well. which is interesting because he's a very established Buddhist, right? And he writes Jewish music because he married her. and she's exploring this music, and he posts regularly, and he's like against this distortions of the news and October 7th and things like that. And, you know, he's not Jewish, but he's... So, yes. Yes. And that's the point about Jewish music. Throughout history has been a fusion, right? So anyone who claims that Jewish music is this or that or the other is only seeing that narrow, tiny little window. It's like, you know, the only authentic international language is English. What? Really? No? Right? So just another saying, I cannot sit at the Shabbat table without a new song. There is no festive Shabbat without a new song. You know, music is always about connection, about spirituality, about connecting, and Zmirot have been one of the ways that has been done around the Shabbat table. Now, what does that mean? Zmirot can be all sorts of things, but in a traditional household and in a traditional siddur, you will find a list of the songs. They're Jewish hymns, usually sung in Hebrew or Aramaic, sometimes also in Yiddish or Ladino, but the best known Zmirot are those sung around the table on Shabbat and Jewish holidays. Some of them are specific to certain times of the day, on Friday night, on Saturday noon, or the third meal, Suda Shlishit, before sundown. And the words to Zmirot are often taken from poems written by various rabbis and sages during the Middle Ages. Others are anonymous folk songs that have been passed down from generation to generation. So I wanted to give you a few examples of Zmirot. So... The joys of technology. I saved it a few minutes ago and now I can't find it. Okay, I'm going to switch this across. Well, that's just lighting the Shabbat candles, but let me try and find you. That's the Binder version.
When we go to services on Friday night, we often...
Now you don't really want to hear Paul's hymn. Here we go. So this is a Turkish Sephardi. We used to sing that here. Haven't done that in a while. Yes, so that's an Enkelohenu. Just so you... There you go. Yes? Yes. So... Again, the oud. afterwards, which is the sun section. Okay, I'm just aware it's 8:56, so I have 3 more minutes to wrap up tonight. Where we've gotten to. So we've shifted from biblical instruments through to the Baroque era. Now, next week I need to finish all of Baroque, classical, romantic, contemporary era and get to Broadway in one session or less. So just so you know, we're moving from the music of Salomon Rossi through to modernity. So we're going to go through a whole series of Jewish composers, but also of Jewish influenced composers. So sometimes it's Jewish music written by non-Jews, or performed by non-Jews, or written by Jews, as the case may be, just doesn't really matter, because what defines Jewish music is not necessarily whether it's written by a Jew, or whether it's composed by a Jew, or whether it's performed by a Jew, or whether it sounds Jewish, because what could possibly be defined as a Jewish sound, right? So, as we've explored a little bit today, some of the music might well sound a bit like things that are very well known to you, and some of the things are completely different. So some things might sound like this. Anyone recognize the musicians? The Barry sisters. So some people might identify Jewish music as the Barry sisters, or a Yiddish Mame, or I don't know, Rozenkes mit Mandeln. Like my cousin in France asked me for a translation. She sends me the words of Rozenkes mit Mandeln. She says, "Do you know this song?" I'm like, really? so because she's got no idea, because she comes from a Sephardi world, and even in the Sephardi world, what was her knowledge of Jewish music? She went to weddings where her family would attend, and they'd listen to basically Arabic influenced music. So, what is the definition of Jewish music? There is no definition of Jewish music. Jewish music depends on who composed it, where and what influences were theirs, and incorporates the music of different countries and different eras and different genres. So next week, 2 weeks, sorry. Next week is Shavuot. So we'll stick with the Ashkenazi cheesecake. Believe me, the Sephardim did not do that. But we'll do some cheesecake and some various other things next week, and in 2 weeks' time we'll get through the rest. Sorry, there was another comment? Cooking. Yes. So, and I believe is that Esther facilitating that? Fantastic. So, yes. So there's some wonderful cooking, Indian tradition, other things that are happening. It is now 9:00, so I must love you and leave you and wish you all, go explore Jewish music. If you type into AI or into Google or into YouTube, Jewish music Baroque era, Jewish music classical era, Jewish musical biblical, it will give you a whole playlist, and you can just click on various things and explore, and it is fascinating what you will find. And some of it you will sit there going, oh, it's giving me a headache. That is so, right, oh, no. And some of it you'll say, wow, isn't that amazing? Like listening to Ofra Chaza is astonishing. But I once sat in the car driving back from university, so it's 30 years ago, and another musician was sitting with me, and she's like, Michel, what are you listening to? Like, oh my God, it's terrible. And I was sitting there going, oh, isn't this wonderful, right? Because it was a cultural, I was listening to Ofra Chaza. And to me, it was like associating all these positive things. And for her, it was like someone screeching and running their nails on a blackboard, right? So aesthetics are a big part of it. So let's wrap it up there, but do explore a little bit, and I will see you all soon. And thank you, Ido, for bringing in the oud.